take out even the partisan polling, and Joe Biden is as unpopular as Donald Trump was. In fact, fewer Democrats support Joe Biden right now than Republicans supported Donald Trump. Moderate Democrats are aghast that Joe Biden would side with progressives as aggressively as he does. Progressives are frustrated. Biden hasn't gotten more done and bullied more into his agenda. That's the frame with where I want to spend some moments here. And I've talked about this, and I've done some research. Jonah Goldberg, actually, I've got to credit him in the Dispatch with some of this data. But I want to begin with a quote. This is from the New York Times journalist, Pulitzer Prize winning writer, Nicole Hannah-Jones of the 1619 Project. This is what she said, and it has become dogma on the left. Destroying property which can be replaced is not violence. If you don't mention January 6th of this year, the media and progressives will scream at you. What about January 6th? What about January 6th? January 6th, too many people on the right have decided they're political prisoners. No, they're not political prisoners. Well, they were trying to commit political crimes, but those people deserve to go to jail. You may not like it, but they did. They stormed into the U.S. Capitol. You have to ignore the evidence. You have to ignore your eyeballs and the videotapes of them literally smashing through the doors to get into the United States Congress. Some of them tried to smash down the door of the Speaker's lobby to chase members of Congress. They erected a gallows. They stood in the well of the Senate. The brain biblical donkey with the bison helmet is going to go to jail for 41 months. You play stupid games, you get stupid prizes. I don't have any sympathy. We should not downplay what happened. Unfortunately, the left wants to downplay everything in American history to overplay January 6th. January 6th wasn't good. Let's not forget there were pipe bombs planted at the RNC and the DNC. We don't know who planted them. They still haven't been found, but they were active pipe bombs. But I want to read for you something that Jonah Goldberg wrote yesterday. He's talking about this growing movement of mostly young men, led by some older men who want to be relevant again, on the conservative movement side, who are calling themselves national conservatives. I don't really know what the national conservatism is because it sounds like conservatism to me, by and large. Now, there are some ideas I think I would disagree with that aren't old school conservative, but by and large, they're saying we don't need old school conservatism. We need this new national conservative thing. And part of me thinks it's because there is an oversupply of Twitter pundits and Twitterati who haven't made it into existing think tanks. And so they've essentially got the Twitter think tank of all these guys who hang out together on social media, get together occasionally in public, don't have jobs at the Heritage Foundation, AEI, or other groups. And so they've decided they're doing something new and they're branding it as something cool there. The cool kids, really, it's the same damn thing. They're just repackaging it for themselves and for Twitter as if they've got new ideas, and they really don't. I mean, by and large, this is conservatism. But it sounds cool and new and hip. So let's do it. So Jonah Goldberg was writing in response to this National Conservative Conference. And full disclosure, I got a lot of friends involved with it. I find it when they talk, what are your ideas? They sound very much like the conservative movement. Always. It's just now they're angling for their new think tank position because Heritage is all full up. This is from Goldberg. These were the days when the militant left wasn't dedicated merely to blowing up binary gender categories with tweeted truth bombs, but to blowing up buildings and occasionally people with real bombs. Get this. I did not realize this. Pay attention here. During the summer of 1970 alone, there were 20 bombings a week in California from progressive activists. It's a wonderful feeling to hit a pig, Mark Rudd of the Weather Underground mused. It must be a really wonderful feeling to kill a pig or blow up a building. Jane Fonda held F the Army rallies and in 1972 let herself be used by the enemy as a propaganda tool, even posing behind the trigger of a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun. The Black Panthers, lionized even by many liberals, made Black Lives Matter look like a debating society. And as bad as the BLM and Antifa riots of 2020 were, and they were very bad, they pale in comparison to riots in our past by the left. That's Joel Goldberg. Now, let me take over. In 1971, the left-wing Weather Underground, a member of whom Bill Ayers is where his living room is, the living room in which Barack Obama got his political start. The Weather Underground bombed the U.S. Capitol in 1971. In 1972, the Weather Underground bombed the Pentagon. In 1975, the Weather Underground bombed the State Department. In 1978, they intended to blow up a member of the California State Senate. That's just the Weather Underground. The Black Panthers were as violent. Then there's the Earth Liberation Front, still a front, an organization active today. The Earth Liberation Front has been engaged in numerous terrorist attacks in the United States in the past several decades. They even launched a terrorist attack 2 months after 9/11. You didn't hear about it because people were distracted. They've been bombing buildings, bombing facilities, bombing research facilities, bombing corporate farms, bombing car dealerships. They set fire to a car dealership that sold Hummers. They're not responsible for as much loss of life as the Weather Underground or the Black Panthers, but they're a violent group. Again, though, to quote Nicole Hannah-Jones, destroying property, which can be replaced, is not violence. That's becoming dogma on the left. In 2001, a research report on extremism in the United States said leftist extremists, this is direct quote, leftist extremists were responsible for 3/4 of the officially designated acts of terrorism in the United States in the 1980s. While the media and the FBI and Joe Biden are really concerned about growing right-wing extremism and violence in the country, this report back in 2001 noted that left-wing extremists tend to be younger, better educated, and tend to live in urban areas with a target-rich environment. The other big issue you need to understand is that right-wing extremism is a thing, and it tends to be a thing against the federal government for individualism or federalism or separation. Left-wing violence is Marxist, socialist, and designed to have the intent over time to overthrow the American government and impose a Marxist regime. There was intelligence even into the 2000s that a lot of these progressive violent extremists were getting help from Cuba. I'm sure China's helping now. Now I take you back to Joe Biden's polling. Joe Biden is polling in the low 30s. And progressives, meanwhile, have internalized several propositions. They believe they're the majority in the United States. They truly believe they're the majority now in the country. Do you know how I know they believe it? Same reason that I, as a conservative in the early 2000s, or mid-2000s with Obama as president, was willing to believe conservatives were the dominant class in the country. You run really conservative candidates or really progressive candidates in areas that aren't that conservative or progressive, and you just assume your guy's going to win because everybody really is conservative or everybody really is progressive. Progressives right now are doing what the Tea Party did after 2010. They're running hardcore progressives in areas of the country not receptive to progressivism, and they're losing because they think that everybody agrees with them now. It was a lesson I had to learn as a conservative. Progressives right now are convinced everyone really is on their side, except the racists and bigots. They've internalized they're the majority. They have internalized Republicans are a threat to democracy. You hear this on TV networks, news networks. You hear it in the newspaper. You read it in newspapers that Republicans are a threat to democracy. Progressives believe they're the majority, and they believe that conservatives are a threat to democracy. They have believed as dogma now, and they talk about it on the news all the time, how Republicans suppress the vote. Progressives would be winning. This is what they're saying about Virginia. Had Republicans not suppressed the vote, Terry McAuliffe would have won. Voter suppression explains Democrat losses because progressives are dominant. They've internalized that the GOP is suppressing voters and that the GOP is a threat to democracy. Hello, January 6th. A wave election is shaping up for Republicans in 2022. What do you think the left is going to do? They think Republicans are suppressing the vote. Republicans are a threat to democracy. Progressives are really the majority, and yet Republicans are going to win next year. What do you think they're going to do? They have a history of violence. But wait, they've internalized one further proposition. They have internalized that the world has less than a decade to go before we all die. They believe this. They literally, not figuratively, but they literally believe that if we don't stop climate change in the next decade, that we're toast, that the world will go on, but we will not go on. And their rhetoric expresses their frustration. This is Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader. This is Chuck Schumer yesterday.
Climate change is going to get worse and worse and worse. I tell my constituents, last year with COVID was awful. But in a few years, because of climate change, each year will be worse than COVID, and each year will be worse than the next if we don't do anything about it.
And they're not. They're not going to do anything about it. Because Joe Manchin's going to block them from curbing fossil fuels. And the left believes that it's conservatives, it's Republicans, it's Joe Manchin, and it's corporations that are blocking them from saving all of us. They believe they are the heroes in this narrative. And they believe that they must take action to save us from ourselves. Even those of us who don't want them to, they're doing it for us. They've internalized themselves as heroes. And a quarter of them, a quarter of Americans, I should say, are on Twitter. And the majority of them are progressives. And there's lots of data out there that progressives can no longer relate to conservatives. They view us as the enemy. As some conservatives are viewing them as the enemy, they really do, because they are less likely to have conservative friends than conservatives are to have progressive friends. They are more likely to live in urban enclaves where they don't encounter conservative thought. And they so dominate Twitter, they can spend their day without ever having to engage conservative thought. They don't know us anymore. They think we're bad. We're a threat to democracy, and the world is going to burn unless they do something about it. When you have a group of people who believe they're the majority, their majority is being stymied by others, and those others are both a threat to democracy and on the cusp of taking power back. And if progressives cannot hold on to that power, we're all very literally going to die due to climate change. What do you think they're going to do? The media and the Democrats, they want to have every conversation about right-wing extremism, about right-wing militia groups. And by the way, I'm not dismissing those. They're real. But no one wants to have conversations about what's coming from the left. You can sense it in the air. It's coming. And it's not a new thing. It's a return to something old. Again, in the summer of 1970, there were 20 bombings a week just in California from left-wing groups. Left-wing groups tried to blow up the Capitol, the Pentagon, the State Department, and assassinate elected officials. We should all be troubled about what's coming, as they've internalized they're the majority, Republicans are a threat to democracy, and yet the polling shows Republicans are about to take back Congress and make expansive gains at the state level, which will stop them from healing the planet.